The most powerful families in human history did not merely inherit crowns, they inherited blood, and that blood carried secrets that rulers never wanted spoken aloud. Secrets buried beneath marble palaces, sacred genealogies, and carefully crafted myths of divine lineage. Because from ancient Egypt to imperial Rome, from the courts of China to the castles of Europe, power was often kept pure by keeping it close, dangerously close. And the story of civilization itself cannot be told honestly without confronting the uncomfortable question of how far dynasties went to preserve their rule, and what that obsession with blood purity truly cost humanity. Imagine a world where a king's greatest threat was not an invading army or a rebellious noble, but the slow decay of his own lineage, a decay hidden behind ceremonial robes and divine proclamations. Because in the ancient world, blood was destiny, ancestry was authority, and legitimacy flowed not from popular consent, but from the wounds of royal women chosen not for love, but for lineage. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a god made flesh, the living Horus. And gods did not marry commoners, they married gods, or at least those believed to carry divine blood, which is why royal siblings married one another with ritual precision. Brother to sister, father to daughter, not a scandal but a sacred duty, a reflection of the gods themselves, whose myths celebrated incestuous unions as cosmic necessity. Cleopatra VII, remembered as a seductress and political genius, was also the product of generations of sibling marriages within the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek ruling family that governed Egypt as foreign kings, yet adopted Egyptian customs to legitimize their rule. And when we examine their family tree, it does not branch outward, but curls inward upon itself like a serpent devouring its own tail. Archaeological and genetic studies of royal mummies suggest high levels of congenital deformities, weakened immune systems, and early deaths. And the most famous example, Tutankhamun, the boy king, bore the physical scars of royal isolation: a cleft palate, clubfoot, fragile bones, and a body riddled with disease, a tragic consequence of parents who were themselves siblings. All in the name of divine continuity. Yet Egypt was not unique, it was merely honest about what others conceived. In Mesopotamia, kings claimed descent from gods and heroes, constructing genealogies that justified their absolute power. And while direct sibling marriage was less institutionalized, elite families intermarried relentlessly within narrow circles, creating a ruling class bound by blood and reinforced by fear of dilution. Because to marry outside the elite was to risk losing legitimacy, to weaken the narrative that one's family was chosen by fate itself. As empires expanded, so too did the obsession with lineage, and nowhere was this more visible than in ancient Persia, where the Achaemenid kings married close relatives, including half-sisters and cousins, believing royal blood carried a sacred essence tied to Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. And when Greek historians like Herodotus wrote of these practices, they did so with a mixture of fascination and horror, portraying Persian royalty as decadent and unnatural. Yet their own societies were far from innocent. In ancient Greece, while incest was publicly condemned and dramatized as tragedy in myths like that of Oedipus, the ruling elites of city-states like Sparta practiced a quieter form of blood preservation, encouraging marriages within aristocratic families to maintain land, status, and influence. And while not openly incestuous, these closed networks produced genetic bottlenecks that shaped entire ruling classes. Rome, often held up as a republic of laws and civic virtue, eventually succumbed to the same dynastic anxieties because once emperors replaced elected magistrates, bloodlines once again became political weapons. And the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Rome's first imperial house, was a web of intermarriage, adoption, and manipulation so dense it bordered on the grotesque. Augustus married into the family, arranged marriages for political consolidation, and ensured succession through carefully controlled unions, while later emperors like Caligula and Nero were rumored, and in some cases accused by ancient sources, of incestuous relationships, accusations that may have been exaggerated for propaganda, yet reflect a deeper cultural anxiety about rulers who live beyond moral boundaries. Caligula was said to have slept with his sisters, elevating them almost to divine status, while Nero's marriage to his stepbrother's widow, and later to a castrated male companion, shocked Roman society, not merely because of sexuality, but because it symbolized the complete collapse of traditional lineage structures. And Rome's elites understood instinctively that when bloodlines became unstable, so too did the empire. Across the world in ancient China, dynastic legitimacy rested on the mandate of heaven, a cosmic approval granted to rulers who governed justly. Yet even within this moral framework, blood remained paramount, and imperial families fiercely controlled marriage alliances to preserve power. While sibling marriage was rare and taboo, cousin marriage was common, and concubinage created a vast pool of half-siblings competing for succession, leading to brutal purges, palace intrigue, and generations of psychological trauma. Because when dozens of princes shared the same father but different mothers, the imperial court became a breeding ground not only for heirs but for paranoia. Emperors sought wives from noble families closely tied to the court, avoiding outsiders who might introduce uncontrollable loyalties, and over centuries this insularity contributed to cycles of weak rulers, regents, and eunuch domination, all symptoms of dynasties consumed by their own blood politics. In the Americas, long before European contact, the Inca emperors of the Andes practiced sibling marriage as a cornerstone of imperial ideology, believing the Sapa Inca was the son of the sun god Inti, and only a sister could share his divine essence, and so the royal family became a closed solar lineage, brilliant yet fragile, dependent on strict rituals to maintain cosmic order. When the Spanish arrived, they encountered an empire already strained by succession crises, civil war, and the genetic consequences of centuries of endogamy. And while conquest was swift, it exploited weaknesses long embedded in the system. Mesoamerican rulers, including the Maya and Aztec elites, also practiced restricted marriage patterns within noble classes, reinforcing social hierarchies but narrowing genetic diversity. And while their societies produced remarkable achievements in astronomy, architecture, and art, their ruling classes paid a biological price rarely acknowledged in traditional histories. As we move into medieval Europe, the story becomes both more documented and more devastating because Christian doctrine publicly condemned incest, yet political necessity quietly overruled theology, and royal houses intermarried relentlessly, binding kingdoms together through marriage alliances that slowly turned Europe's aristocracy into one extended family. Cousin marriages were not the exception but the norm, and dispensations from the church allowed unions that would have scandalized commoners, because power once again demanded purity, and purity demanded proximity. The Habsburgs stand as the most infamous example, a dynasty whose jaw became a symbol of genetic collapse, whose kings struggled with infertility, mental illness, and physical deformities, all while ruling one of the most powerful empires in the world. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king, was so severely affected that he could barely speak, chew, or produce an heir, his family tree collapsing inward upon itself through generations of uncle-niece marriages. And when he died childless, Europe plunged into war, proving that the consequences of inbreeding were not merely personal tragedies, but geopolitical disasters. Yet even beyond Europe's courts, the obsession with blood persisted in Islamic caliphates, African kingdoms, and South Asian empires, each adapting lineage control to local customs while pursuing the same goal: the preservation of authority through ancestry. In the Ottoman Empire, while sibling marriage was forbidden, fratricide became institutionalized, as sultans executed brothers to prevent succession disputes, a brutal acknowledgement that shared blood was both a source of legitimacy and the greatest threat to stability. Mughal emperors in India married within Persian and Central Asian elites, maintaining cultural and genetic continuity while navigating the immense diversity of the subcontinent, and though their policies were more flexible, The emphasis on lineage remained central to imperial identity. What emerges across continents and centuries is a pattern both haunting and human. Dynasties feared dilution more than degeneration, believing that mixing blood weakened authority while failing to see that isolation weakened the body itself. Modern genetics now allows us to peer beneath the myths, to trace the mutations, disorders, and vulnerabilities that plagued royal families, and the evidence suggests that ancient dynasties were often far more inbred than traditional histories admit, not because they were ignorant, but because they believed the cost was worth paying. To them, a fragile king was preferable to a strong outsider, a sickly heir preferable to a disputed succession, and the suffering of individuals was justified by the survival of the state. Yet the irony is cruel, because many dynasties fell not despite their blood obsession, but because of it, collapsing under the weight of internal decay, succession crises, and rulers unfit to govern in a rapidly changing world. The myths they told themselves, that their blood was divine, chosen, eternal, could not withstand the slow, relentless logic of biology, and as empires rose and fell, the lesson repeated itself like a whispered warning across time. Today, when we look back at ancient kings and queens, at their gilded portraits and monumental tombs, it's tempting to see only power and grandeur, but beneath the gold lay fragile bodies, haunted minds, and family trees twisted into knots by fear, ambition, and belief. The story of inbred dynasties is not a tale of moral judgment, but of human desperation. A reminder that those who ruled the world were bound by the same biological laws as those they governed, and that no crown, however sacred, could protect blood from itself. In the end, the greatest tragedy of these bloodlines is not that they were inbred, but that they believed isolation was strength, mistaking control for permanence. And in doing so, they wrote into their own genes the slow, silent chronicle of their decline. A chronicle that history long tried to forget, but one that science and storytelling can no longer ignore.